ready? Ready to take a ride? Grab your coffee and strap yourself in, because the show is about to begin. From the front lines of America, Babylon, and transmitting worldwide on the internet and satellite, you are listening to Omega Man Radio Network with Shannon Davis.
And welcome to the Mega Man Radio Network. We are back. Tonight has been a double feature. And I'm excited about our next guest. It's been my pleasure and honor to welcome Ragnar Benson on the program tonight. Again, this is a live program. I want to say shouts out to everybody listening around the world. Our friends over in Canada, Australia. We've got people tuning in from Netherlands. We've got Germany. We've got Hawaii, Singapore, Hong Kong. And more folks tuning in every day. Thanks to you. Get the word out about Omega Man Radio. We broadcast nightly, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Sunday, and then we're now doing our double shows many nights, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Time. We're also rebroadcasting on American Voice Radio Network satellite, and we're on WWCR shortwave on Sunday afternoons. Without further ado, we're going to get on Ragnar Benson. For those of you who do not know Ragnar Benson, he is probably the most prolific survivalist author of all time. I call him the granddaddy of preparedness. He's been around a long time. And when you've been around a long time, you've got a lot of wisdom, and he's put it into books. And I remember buying some of Ragnar's books back in the 90s, and they were in my library. Very informative books. And here's a man that speaks from experience. He has been to 90 different countries in a time period of between 3.5 weeks and 3.5 years. That's a lot of travel. He spends at least 8 months out of the year overseas traveling. That's one of my favorite pastimes. When I can do it, I certainly love to do it. And I've only scratched the surface of this world. He's been all over. We're going to be talking about some of his recent trips, some of his travels to places like Russia that many Americans have not seen yet. But, we have all these formed opinions of these places from our media, which is nothing but programming, folks. You know that. We can't get the straight truth out of TV. I don't even have a TV anymore. I don't get my information from there. And I hope you don't trust it either. You've got to have an alternative means of information. That also means books. So thank God for our First and Second Amendment rights. And before I start preaching, let me get Ragnar on the line. Stand by. Ragnar, how are you tonight?
Well, I'm getting along pretty good. That's certainly a very laudatory introduction. And I might point out, in terms of your not having a TV, tell me true or false. For every hour you watch TV, you lose 1 IQ point.
Maybe 10. I think it's worse now.
I've never had anybody argue with me about that.
That is so true. Today, the youth don't even read anymore. I don't know what's up with that. They don't read. They don't go outside and play, throw the football.
Don't run a trap line. They don't go hunting.
Oh man, yes.
When we were kids, one of the things that we did extensively, in fact, one of my first real jobs where I got paid for was working for the local powder monkey, doing contract blasting.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Wow.
Can you imagine a 13-year-old kid doing that now?
I don't even know what it is. Oh, my goodness.
Well, we set dynamite, and we dynamited out cement walls and knocked down buildings, and we cleared stumps from a parking lot and that sort of thing.
Oh, my goodness. You were literally raised on the farm. Now, how old are you now, Ragnar?
72.
Okay, so you have been around quite a bit of time. You were there before even World War II. And
but I remember that vaguely, just vaguely. My recollection of it is that we spoke German at home at the time of World War II, and then that quit just dramatically.
Yes.
And I can remember listening to the radio, and my mom and dad being intimately aware of the cities and places and rivers and so forth in Europe that the news announcer was talking about, well, we have sent soldiers over and taken this city and taken that city, and it was we did this. It was they identified, although they were immigrants, they identified with the U.S., and they were part of the U.S. effort in World War II.
Yes, sir. Now, you were raised up on the farm, and you basically learned a lot of skills that most people have no understanding of whatsoever. I mean, today what do? We go to the grocery store every 3 days to buy our food. We have no idea what it means to milk a cow. If you fish, it's just for sport. What's happened to America?
Speak for yourself, Bruce. Speak for yourself. We were just up in Alaska. The first day we got 580 pounds of fish, which we turned into fillets and are now in the freezer. But one of the important skills that we don't have today, and that my children all have, is how to butcher. In other words, how to take a goat or a beef or whatever, a sheep or whatever, and turn it into usable cuts of meat. Even how to butcher a rabbit or a chicken or a turkey. We don't know that today. And that's a shame.
I thought they all came like that already. That's what most people think. They have no idea. You've got to have the skill to go from the cow to your hamburger.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have no concept of how to do that. Now, you learned all kind of skills on the farm. What was it like as a young man growing up? What did your dad have you in charge of doing?
Well, we were poor. My folks themselves, by that time, were living in Europe. And so I was raised with grandparents who were actually Russian immigrants. And we, during the cold of the winter, it got pretty grim. And I can remember many Decembers and Januaries when our only income was from my trap line.
Oh, my goodness. Now, when you say trap line, were you trapping what type of mink?
We were trapping mink mostly. If it warmed up a bit, we might get a coon or a possum now and then. Skunks was another one. Fox, we caught a number of fox. Weasel were commonly caught. Muskrats, a lot of muskrats.
Now, what were you doing? Were you taking them for the skins, or did you eat some of the meat also?
Well, if to this day, I think one of my favorite meals is muskrat.
Really?
If it's made with a nice white raisin gravy and so forth, but the muskrat's got to be one. See, a trapper usually tries to catch the critter and kill it as soon as possible, usually by drowning. Well, I didn't like to eat a drowned muskrat, but if I did happen to get one alive and could shoot it or knock it in the head with my axe, then we would always take that home and eat it.
Well, I imagine if you gave me some A1 or Heinz 57, I would probably throw it on there. It would taste all right.
I think you would like it. The muskrat is very much like very lean duck. No grease to it.
Oh, my goodness.
It's all dark meat.
Did you all go hunting on the farm and go after deer and small game too?
Oh, yeah. We did hunted deer a lot. Mm-hmm.
So you learned the skills of, how to actually catch your own food. And then from there...
and gardening. let's not forget about gardening, Bruce.
Tell me about that. What experience did you have with that as a young man?
Well, I've had a garden every year that I can remember. I don't think there's a year in my life where we didn't have a garden. And the important thing, I was just telling a fellow the other day, actually a computer technician, he came out and he wanted to talk about survival. And he wanted to talk about using his computer for survival. Well, I don't know how in the world he'd do that. But I was telling him he needs to plant a garden because it takes about 5 years in any given location to learn how to raise a garden in that particular soil type and climate.
Oh, my goodness. You might have to have trial and error for a year or two, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or a disaster.
Sure.
Yeah.
My goodness. But y'all were set up to actually live off the land, trap your food, grow your food, something that most of us in this generation, I'm relatively young still, I'm 41, but I have no concept of it now. I talk to my mother. She was raised on the farm. My grandfather remembers being a sharecropper, for tobacco and corn and things like that. But my goodness, so far removed that's a shame. Mm-hmm. It's almost like taking a domestic animal and releasing it into the wild. They can't fend for themselves if they have to.
Well, I'm a little concerned vis-a-vis the average American and, say, the average German from World War II, or let's even talk about Russians right now.
Yes.
They still seem to have more basic gardening and survival and scrounging skills to find food out in the wild. Now, you wouldn't survive in the wild on wild game entirely, and on a thing of berries and nuts and so forth that you found in the woods, but they sure would be a supplement to your diet.
I have been very keen on survival maybe for about 20 years. I have known that the economic collapse was coming. It was inevitable, and I asked myself, what would I do in that time? And, of course, I worked with, limited resources. I wanted to, have land and so forth. It just never worked out. But I did do other preparations to include, food storage. And I would talk to people, Ragnar, and I said, what are you going to do when you wake up and the bottom has dropped out? And many people say, I'll just go shoot a deer. And that's about the only preparation they have in mind. But the truth of it is, if that's all they've got planned, they'll probably starve to death, wouldn't they?
I would think so. The basic rule of survival is that you can't expend more energy in the process of gaining whatever the food or their energy or whatever than you recover in the process. In other words, sport hunting is not an alternative in a survival situation.
Because you'll end up, again, you want to lose weight, you burn more calories than you take in, right?
That's exactly right. That's it. That's the bottom line.
You will die, folks, if you spend more money to catch the food than the calories it's going to give you once you eat it.
And another thing to keep in mind, too, Bruce, is the difference between the Chinese and the Indians. It hasn't happened lately, but the Indians traditionally starved, and the Chinese prospered fairly well as long as the government left them alone. The difference was different bodies of Indians some wouldn't eat cows, some wouldn't eat pigs, some wouldn't eat this and that, whereas for the Chinese, even everything, pigeons, rats, bird nests, everything, they convinced themselves it was a delicacy and just went ahead and ate it and got the calories out of it. So that's a part of the realignment of your thinking that you have to undergo in terms of making it in a survival situation. You've got to eat what's out there. If it's rats and cats and dogs, you better learn to like them.
Well, if today you have a lot of these reality TV shows. Two that I particularly like. There's one called Man vs. Wild with this ex-SAS soldier called Bear Grylls. And then you've got an American, actually it's Canadian, his name is Survivor Man. And those are very popular series, and a lot of people like them because, they would teach you how to survive if you were, out in the wild somewhere. They go around to different locales around the world. But I think maybe a lot of it was curiosity, too, is because it's something a lot of people haven't thought about or wouldn't know what to do if they were in that situation because it's so far removed from them living in the city, working 9 to 5. But it's been my belief for a long time that normal lifestyle is coming to an end soon. And what are you going to do when that day comes? You actually learn how to live off the grid. What does it mean to live off the grid?
Well, that means that you don't have any power line from the power company to your retreat or your whatever you want to call it, your home, your place where you're going to stay, if there's a collapse. And I do that probably unconventionally, Bruce. But every survival is an intensely personal process. And survival is also could be called preparedness, of course, and that's intensely personal. And what works for me might not work for you. But what I intend to do, because I have 5 freezers where we keep food in, and the food that we get hunting or and shooting and raised in the garden and so forth, I intend to use generators to generate power for the freezer for a while.
Okay, so you can keep the meat.
Keep the food. Yeah, keep it from spoiling.
It's from spoiling.
And then, let me ask you a question, Bruce.
Yes, sir.
Along the same subject, when you said you decided to lay back food, what did you decide to store?
Well, I tell you what I was doing. I was, working full time in the city, and I had to live in the city limits. So I was limited to maybe garage storage space. So I decided, to me, I needed a means to have clean water, so I invested in some water filtration. And then for food, I was looking for stuff that I could, store many years. And then I began to look at it and say, what's going to last? Well, I ended up going with long-term grains like long brown rice, white rice. I put in beans of different varieties, lots of rice and beans. And what I would do is I'd put them in 5-gallon buckets, and most of it I hand-packed myself. And then I went after high-quality protein, and the problem with meat is most of us get it frozen, so what are you left with? So I invested in canned tuna, and then as I had a little bit more money, I started to go from canned goods into, I guess I call it the Cadillac of long-term foods, like the Alpine Air, the freeze-dried rations. I'd had a friend who had gotten a source of some long-range LARP rations, so I got a few of those. Found out things like you can get Yoder's ground beef that'll last 5 years in a can. Supplement it with some MREs, and even some canned goods. But that was about the extent of it. I figured if I could eat rice, beans, and some tuna every day, I would be okay.
You would. Now, the reason I asked that question, Bruce, is so many people think, well, I'm going to lay back food so I have a couple of years' supply, and then they get to immediately look at freeze-dried, and then that's a turnoff because it's so expensive. It's good,
it is
tasty, and it's variable, but that's an error. If you're in a survival situation, you want your food to, and this is an important philosophical concept, you want your food to be fairly mundane so that you don't, out of boredom, you don't just start eating and you eat it all away ahead of time. In other words, it should be a little problem to, you're going to face your beans and rice again today. I sure wish I had something better, but that's all I have and I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat it. So, in other words, am I making myself clear?
Oh, yes, sir. It's like the bag of chips that I bite. They taste so good that I usually can't stop at one. I'll eat the whole bag. But that won't be the case with rice and beans.
Yeah. Now, what I suggest people buy is dried peas and lentils because they're extremely high in protein. They're extremely inexpensive. And they're being Middle European myself, I find them extremely tasty, but I still, not to the point that I sit down and eat them all away, just eat, and have them all gone pretty quick. But lentils can be purchased for 35 cents a pound, and a pound will generally last a person a day.
Yes, sir.
And split peas and whole peas, same thing. Reconstitute them with water, and you can fry them, and there are many things to do with them. Make a gruel and a mush out of them.
Now, let me ask you a question. And, folks, I'm sorry. I didn't give you out the contact number tonight. Usually I hog the guest. I promised I wouldn't do that with Ragnar. His number is, the number to dial in tonight is 917-889-2745. Or if you have a question for Ragnar, the toll-free is 877-806-2482. I apologize for interrupting you, Ragnar. We've got people listening that maybe this is the first time they've ever given the idea of preparation or a serious consideration, and they're doing it because they see the events in the world escalating. And they've heard the warning for so long, they say, well, maybe there's some truth to it, I better get busy. I guess better late than never, but you gave the advice of lentils and peas. Where would you go to look for them, and then how do you store them once you get them so that they don't perish?
I buy them in 25-pound paper bags, and then I put the 25-pound paper bags inside of a plastic garbage can.
Okay.
And then I take some self-tapping wood screws or metal screws and screw the lid onto the trash can. And I've got some peas and lentils that are still in perfectly good shape that have been stored for 20 years.
Oh, my goodness. You didn't have to go through the nitrogen pack process and buy all those Mylar bags and things like that?
No, you don't. If you buy them commercially, Bruce, because they've cleaned them. They've taken the grasshoppers and the bees' wings and so forth out of them.
Okay.
And so the same. I don't store wheat for that same reason, because I can get wheat from farmers, but it generally has got bees' knees and weed seeds and that sort of thing in it, which just makes it unpalatable.
I tell you what I did one time. I bought some 25-pound bags of corn. I think it was corn, and I got lazy and didn't put it into some 5-gallon buckets, or in your case the trash cans. And after a while, I went down to my basement one day and I heard it moving, and I heard a noise, and I think the weevils were getting in there. Do you have to throw it out at that point, or could you eat the weevils if you had to?
If you had to, you could eat the weevils. That was common in the various navies around the world, and up until say about 1850 or so, where they could just ate them. They considered them the extra protein and not a bit objectionable. And I think of the English Navy and the French Navy and the Spanish Navy for sure, and the Portuguese Navy. They folks ate them.
Now, you
could have eaten it. It wouldn't have been particularly aesthetic, but you could have eaten it.
Now, what do you do for? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's a cautionary thing, though, Bruce, is that if you buy farm-run commodities like corn, wheat, oats, something like that, it's going to have too many bugs and things in it. You need to get the commercial product that's put up in bags, that's been properly cleaned and so forth. Pay another 10 cents a pound for it, but not really, because all of that chaff and diatheris is taken out of it, and so there's actually less weight there.
Okay, now the next question comes from our chat room here. We have a live chat room. They said, okay, so I have stored maybe my rice and my beans and my lentils, but I have a power outage. What do you do in that case? You've got the dry good.
Yeah. Well, all survival requires, you look at what's essential for survival. And it isn't much. It's food, shelter, energy, and water. And you need to have every one of those where it's extremely important that without it you die. You must have 3 separate and distinct sources. Now, I would say one of those sources should be renewable. I think, for instance, we have a lot of stored energy here in terms of heating oil, that sort of thing. But my renewable energy is firewood. And if the power goes off, and it did here up on the mountain in about 2 weeks ago. And so we simply built a fire in the fireplace, got out our fry pan, and fixed dinner.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome. So you have a couple backup systems. You'll have heating oil, but then when that goes out, you can always switch and go to wood, which is what all the old-timers used to use anyway, right?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Before we had electricity, you had oil lanterns, kerosene. Now, is there a safe way to store fuel? Do you recommend kerosene over gasoline or what?
Well, I like the fuel oils. Kerosene in 55-gallon barrel is okay, but it's expensive. I think much better to get number 2 fuel oil and store it. And I usually store 1,000 gallons of it.
A lot of people say, well, I think I'll just go get me a Coleman generator, but how practical is a gasoline generator?
I think impractical. My 2 generators are both diesel. But then I have a very, very good friend the other side of the mountain who just bought a generator, and he got one that runs on LP gas. Now, again, survival is a personal matter, and you must evaluate all the circumstances and situations for yourself. And other than listening to me regarding you better do something, what specifically you do is up to you, whatever seems best.
Well, and I appreciate that. And it depends on your location and so forth, but you're still going to have these essential folks. Now, I remember when I lived in Tijuana, Mexico. You go over there, everybody uses these big, I guess they're 50-gallon propane canisters. It's hooked up to your stove, hooked up to your hot water heater, and we would have a power outage over there. And I said, wait a minute, I guess I'm screwed. Then I realized, wait a minute, I've got the propane. So I was able to take a bath and cook. We just had to use candles, but, as long as I had hot water for a shower, I was happy.
Yeah.
And, that propane tank would last me about 2 months before I'd have to refill it. So it really lasted a long time. So I got a couple of them, and I knew I had a system to survive a while with no electricity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing that's very, very important folks don't think of is that preparedness and survival requires lots and lots of work. And in many places in the U.S., you don't have enough hours of daylight to perform all of the work and chores that are required. So you must think about some artificial lighting so that you could in the evening be snapping beans, peeling squash, or doing whatever, putting up food, butchering a deer, butchering a goat, a sheep, whatever it might be, rabbits.
What's your top choice for lighting?
I'm sorry, Bruce?
Let's say there's no electricity, or you're not living in the desert where you could have a solar power generator. What's your top choice for backup light?
I like propane as a backup. The one propane lantern will light a considerable area, and in addition to the oil, I try and keep a generous supply, a 2-year supply of propane on hand.
Hey, that's a good plan right there. Let's not forget about water. A lot of people say, well, I guess my number one priority is water. I can only live 3 days without it. What can a person do living in an urban situation to have some water on hand? What's the best way to store it and treat it?
Okay, the thing that I saw in Berlin and let's see, where else? Oh boy, it escapes me right now. But anyway, one of the things that they did is to catch rainwater and put it into something that substitutes for a cistern, or you can go down to local ponds or whatever. But then that water has to be purified, and you can build one of the not easy. That's too strong a word. One of the effective ways of purifying water is to run it through a sand filter. Just build a 2x6 frame and fill it with sand with a screen on the bottom, and pour the water through it and catch it again in a bucket, and then treat the water with a couple of ounces of chlorine bleach. It doesn't taste very good, but it'll keep you alive.
Okay, I like that solution. In fact, I had tried that one time. I got one of these food-grade 55-gallon barrels, filled it up, and put a little bit of bleach in there. If you've got some extra water, you can survive, folks. And hopefully the water comes back on, But if you're without water, you're not going to last long. Have you been down the road and you got caught in traffic and you didn't have so much as a water bottle in your car?
Yeah.
I think, what about...
Unless there's a spring or a stream or something close at hand that you can get some water out of.
Now, when you're drinking water out of something like that, a stream or creek, do you have to watch out for giardia?
Yeah.
So you probably want to have something like a Catadine water filter, or what do you recommend?
Well, I usually, what we do for water here is we have a well, we can catch rainwater and snow water, and we have a pond. Now, if you're living in the city, it's kind of a tough deal. I have seen people put in shallow wells in their front lawn in suburban areas with a pump on them, and then be able to pump water from, say, 20 feet or so. And I've seen that work, especially in the south. But it's a tough deal if you're living in the city.
Now, Ragnar, you were raised on the farm, and so you were pretty busy as a young man. But that wasn't all that you were doing. At one time, you wanted to be able to defend yourself, and you found a unique solution for that. Tell us about that.
Okay, well, I think what you're referring to is when I was 14 years old.
Yes.
I wanted to get a pistol to carry on the trap line because the rifle was too cumbersome, and the basic pack was almost 80 pounds, and that was just a tough slog to carry that from one end of the trap line to the other. And so I kind of looked around a bit what was the best alternative. And in Indiana, and a 14-year-old couldn't purchase a pistol. But unless you had an Indiana dealer's license, which there was no age limit on. And how one got an Indiana dealer's license was get a federal firearms permit. And so at age 14, I sent $1 off to the feds and got an FFL, which I've had ever since.
Listen, I thought I was young. I got one at 21. And that was the age, but man, you got in there, or you got in the grandfather clause, and you've literally had one.
I think so.
Probably longer than anybody in America.
I think so.
Congratulations.
Yeah, 58 years I've had one.
Man, that's pretty wild. Oh boy. Yeah. Well, that was a pretty cool way. So you were born in you were raised here in America, up on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
What came next for you? You decided you wanted to travel at some point.
My folks were very international in outlook and so forth, and I think one of the first big travel projects I did was went down with my father to Cuba, where he had a printing factory. They printed Christmas cards down there,
really? And
I enjoyed Cuba so much I stayed there until Castro took over.
Oh my goodness!
And then I decided maybe I better come home.
Now, let me ask you a question. You were there pre-Bay of Pigs? You remember the...
Oh, yeah. Oh, certainly. Yeah, I was there when Castro took over. Let's see, it was 1959, January 1, 1959.
That used to be like the Las Vegas of the United States. You'd hop on a boat and go over from Miami, be there, 90 minutes?
Yeah. No, it was overnight, actually, the vessel was. The ferry boat that took the cars, anyway. The one that I rode, it got there, it was an overnight passage for the 90 miles.
What was Havana like back then before Fidel took over?
Well, I thought that they had a very vibrant middle class developing and so forth, and the middle class tended to support Fidel. But Batista was no charming individual either. So I can both understand them not liking Batista and maybe not understanding Fidel. That was sure my case because I was actively participated in the revolution, and I guess at that age I just didn't think about it.
Wow. Of course, today it's difference between day and night, isn't it?
Yeah. I was back in 94 and 97. Went back to kind of look around and see what Cuba was like as compared to when I was there.
Now, is it true they're still using vehicles from the 50s? They just keep refurbishing the parts?
Oh yeah, for sure, and a lot of bicycles and a lot of horse-drawn vehicles, and they even had. I'm not sure they use them. But if I was there in 97, so that's 13 years ago, so things could have still changed a bit. But at that time, they had a bus-like business. that they dragged behind farm tractors up and down the road, and that's how they transported people.
Wow. Now, what was it like being an American there after Castro took over? Did you feel at some point in time you might be persona non grata, might have to get out?
Well, my contact with Castro was Armando was his name. That's the only name I know for him. And he was caught by the Batistas and killed. And that was right at the time that Castro took over. And so I just boogied down to the ferry and checked through passport control and all, such as it was back then, and waited in the terminal about 4 hours until the ferry got there, and then took off for Miami.
Wow.
So I got out of there. I don't know if they were looking for me or not, but they must have known that Armando was my close personal friend.
Wow, you got out by the skin of your teeth.
They being the well, I don't know if the Fidelites would have been upset with me at that time, because they sure supported the revolution.
Sure, absolutely. So Batista was overthrown. Fidel was there. Now, did you see any of the American invasion force sent by the CIA?
No. See, that was many years later.
Okay.
That was many, many years later. I've been to the Bay of Pigs. Was there in '94 and '97 as well, and I've been to Venalius, where the missile crisis started, and so forth. But that's well after the fact.
My goodness!
No,
wow.
And let's see, my interface with the guns of the revolution and so forth involved walking up and down the beach at Veradero, and watching for the yachts which were coming in from I don't know where, unloading large wooden crates with I'm not sure what was in them. And whenever the beach patrol came around the corner at the point at Veradero Beach, I would shine my mirror, and all of the yachts would disappear out in the ocean again.
Wow. Man. Now, did you ever run into Che Guevara over there?
No. I might have met Raul. I can't be sure. That's a long time ago, and events were moving very, very quickly, and this and that and so forth. So I can never be absolutely sure about that, but I think I did meet Raul at one point.
Okay, that's Fidel's brother, Raul Castro.
Yeah, a question for you, Bruce.
Yes,
when
sir.
I lived and worked in Cuba, the conventional wisdom was that Raul was Fidel's half-brother. That has never come out in the current media and so forth. What do you remember about that?
Well, you know what? All I know is the very little that I've gleaned extracurricularly. We didn't learn about any of this in high school. I graduated high school back in '87. I was like 17. Again, I'm 41 now, and they wouldn't even go into Vietnam. They said, "Oh, it's too recent for us to talk about." I mean, I hate to admit that I had an American education. We went as far as Civil War, and I would get angry. I said, "I don't want to hear about that. I want to know about NAM." Well, I have no idea.
Bruce, there's bound to be somebody listening who would know the answer to that. And that's my dilemma. I don't know if he's a half-brother or not. All I know is that at the time I lived and worked in Cuba, we thought he was. So I was under the assumption somebody would call in and set me straight on that. I appreciate the information.
Absolutely. Of course, I read a lot, and up until I became enamored with the computer, and then I went the way of most of the mainstream today, computer, and you forsake the book, which is a shame because there's so much knowledge in the books, and I love books. In fact, I'd love to own a library. I go to these bookstores, I want to buy them all, but, I love information. Even if I don't read it immediately, I know I've got it there in my hand if I need it. But
yeah, that's right. It's a reference.
Exactly. Back to the story. So you started to travel, and from there, did you come back to America, or did you continue to travel across the world?
No. I came back to America, and then eventually went and farmed for 10 years on my own, and then moved to Africa for a year.
Africa, really?
Yeah, and at that time I spent a good deal of time with the Rhodesian police.
Wow.
And then we came back to America. I had my kids with at the time, and it just chapped me that they had to wear a uniform to go to school. Now, that is not logical. I know any number of listeners will call up and say, Ragnar, that is just completely foolish. But at the time, I just really objected to it, and so we just came back to the States.
Oh, my goodness. Now, speaking of Africa, I've been as far as South Africa and up to the border of Namibia, and that was about it. I want to go back and visit. My father, as a young man, actually lived in Libya in pre-Muammar Gaddafi days. That's another story for another program. But I've always wanted to explore some more. But I was a big fan of Soldier and Forger magazine. I love all these movies like Dogs of War and The Wild Geese. But you mentioned Rhodesia. You were actually a mercenary at one time?
I wouldn't say actually a mercenary. What I did is dealt guns and ammunition there.
Wow.
So depends how you call it, Bruce. You could say I was a mercenary, but that was my involvement with the Rhodesian police, supplying ammunition for them.
Interesting. And that's a thriving market, even today.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't get the good stuff over here because they banned it with Reagan. So we've got we basically get stuff that Eastern European bloc, and you put it together, and in accordance with the rules to get it in, and you've got a thumb hole stock instead of a folding stock.
Mm-hmm.
I like the AK-47 style, but unfortunately, the closest I can get to it is like an SLR-95, a Bulgarian model. And you're lucky if you can find a milled receiver. Most of it's stamped. You know what I mean? But a lot of cool stuff over there. Well, we could talk shop all the time.
Talk about guns all evening. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. When I was when a young man, my father did two things. He loved to go to movies and loved hunting and guns. So naturally, it kind of was in my blood. I enjoyed hunting sports and movies. Still do to today. But I'm proud of our Second Amendment rights here. But you got to see some of Africa, and that wasn't the only place. You've been to 90 countries.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I've lived and worked in for between 3.5 weeks and 3.5 years in 90 different countries.
Amazing. Now, I promised we were going to take a break, folks. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to like a 3 or 4 minute break, and then we're going to be back with Ragnar, and I want to talk about your career as a book author, because how many books have you got under your belt right now?
46.
46, man. I'm still working on my first.
That's a tough way at making a living, I'll tell you.
I want to talk about that, how you got started, and some of your recent trips. And we'll be back with Ragnar Benson. If you'd like to call in tonight, the phone number is 917-889-2745, and we'll be back in a few moments.
Okay, 3 minutes, you think?
Absolutely. Time to get a refill on your coffee, folks. Hit a bathroom. We'll be back.
All right. Here we go.
And you're listening to Omega Man Radio. Special guest tonight, Ragnar Benson. His books are available over at Amazon.com and also PaladinPress.com. Very unique books. And I would tell you, if you would like to call in tonight, do so. I will open up the line, toll-free 877-806-2482, and we'll be back in just a few moments. And we're back. You're listening to the Omega Man Radio Network. This is a live program, and our special guest tonight is Ragnar Benson. I call him the granddaddy of survivalism because he has been around, he has been there, he's done that. Over 46 books, published books to his credit. Probably the oldest FFL dealer in America since age 14. That's pretty cool. And he has been to 90 countries between 3.5 weeks and 3.5 year period. Man, he has traveled. He's got some stamps on that passport. I know that. I did a lot of traveling. I had so many I had to actually have them stitch an extra NC Minute. Let's get Ragnar back online. Hey, Ragnar.
Hi there. Hi. Yeah, that's right. One of the first things we always do when we get a new passport is go and get the extra pages. Because the little wimpy passport they customarily issue doesn't last very long.
Now, that is the truth, and I tell you, it comes in handy. Otherwise, you sit there and, they're trying to find spaces, and, it's just a pain in the butt. At any rate.
Or you send it off for a visa, and then they don't have a space for the visa.
Isn't that the truth? And, I did that just traveling through Central America. I've been to Israel, been to Africa. That's about it. Now, you've been to 90 countries. Now, you spend at least half the year overseas. You really have a wanderlust there, and I don't blame you because there's so many beautiful parts of the world to see. You recently got back on a really cool trip. You were telling me you took a trip to Russia?
I did, yes. I wanted
what
to
was
do
that
that
like?
because my folks were of Russian background and left Russia during the time of the Summer Revolution of 1905. That would have been my grandparents' parents.
Really?
On my mother's side.
Oh, man. That was during the overthrow of the Tsar?
They tried. The revolution was not successful. It actually started in the Black Sea area and spread a bit. And the Tsar, Nicholas III, as I remember, was very reticent about making any accommodations to the folks. But it started over the fact that they were serving spoiled meat to the sailors on one of the vessels in the Black Sea. But anyway, that's a complete aside, Bruce, and I'm sure there's very few listeners that are going to be particularly interested in that. But I wanted to go to Russia to see for myself. So much of what we hear about and see on TV is absolutely untrue. So I wanted to go to Russia and see for myself what it was like.
Wow. Now, I have my own, preconceived notions of what Russia might be like just based on what I see it portrayed at us on television. But a lot of people have a contorted view of it. What did you actually see in Russia? What is going on over there right now?
Okay, here is my take on it. Having spent a great deal of time in Eastern Germany and Poland and the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and Hungary, and Czech Republic and the Slovakian Republic, quite a cross section right there. I was expected to see lots and lots of drunk people out on the street, a lot of bars, a lot of girly bars, a lot of hookers out on the street, and so forth. And I can tell you, Bruce, none of that. Absolutely none of that in any of the cities. And we were in quite a few different cities in Russia, including Moscow and St. Petersburg and a number of small villages and towns in between. None of that at all. The Moscow and St. Petersburg are the two of the cleanest cities that I know of in the world. They also have the most monumental traffic jams of any cities that I know of in the world. They rival even Bangkok, Thailand, in terms of just this, and Hanoi, Vietnam, in terms of just being completely snarly and awful. And huge numbers of large Mercedes, Audis, VWs, and expensive Nissans and that sort of thing, Fords, even a few, running up and down the streets there. But very clean cities. And the freeways are built on 3 levels, much like they are in California. And there's a lot of modern freeways. That is very evident. And lots of things in the stores. It did not see the dingy, terrible, drab buildings like are so common to Poland, for instance, and to Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia. It did not see those. And that might be in part because the Russians are running such massive refurbishing programs. Seems like 1 building in 20 in the large cities is under refurbishment right now.
So they're actually pretty affluent. And what I had gleaned on my own was that Russia, India, and China are buying massive amounts of gold and silver. And they're actually propping up the ruble with a lot of gold backing it up. It's a very strong currency, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. It's 30 to 1 to the dollar, and it isn't improving a whole bunch. But then Russia does mine a lot of gold, so they might be holding that in reserve. And we do know from even the Wall Street Journal the last few days had articles concerning the fact that Chinese are now hoarding gold.
Yes, they are. And, of course, Russia has control of the oil over there, right? So they could pretty much turn the lights off.
I think that's where the money is coming from. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, wow.
Well-dressed people on the streets, and if you want to see drunks in a lot of bars and a lot of girly bars and hookers, you must go to Poland. And you can see that there, but not in Russia itself that I saw.
Now, you hear a lot about the Russian mob and so forth. Was that a danger at any time when you traveled over there?
I think it's evident there. I think that it's an undercurrent to continually. The guides that we dealt with. Now, a couple of things, Bruce. To start, I'm going to answer your question, but let's start with the fact that we're conversant and fairly conversant in German and Spanish and Hebrew, but not Russian, and of course English. And there's none of those languages did a nickel's worth of good in Russia. You speak Russian, and that's it. So, other than what we heard filtered through guides, why, that's about the best we could do. But the guides continually talked about a lack of rules and regulations, which precluded business development and that sort of thing.
Amazing.
So maybe that's coming. I don't know.
Okay, so now as an American going to Russia, did you get harassed at all or questioned?
No.
Why are you here?
No,
were they
none at
pretty
all.
Open arms?
Yeah. No, they were very nice to us. They were very, very nice. In many regards, every place, in small villages, small rural villages, and big cities and so forth. And we stopped to inquire of a policeman occasionally, and we heard that they would try and shake you down, and they had none of that occurring. And so, no, I didn't feel threatened at all, although I was prepared to be.
Yeah, most of the pictures kind of painted as, you go over there, you'll be tracked by the KGB, and you'll be under constant surveillance and harassed. And really, they've got their mind on more important things. They're trying to build their economy over there, aren't they?
I think so. They're trying to make money, and boy, there's a lot of her there.
Man, while we're over here dismantling ours, they're taking it to the next level over there.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you got to visit quite a few countries. Now, let me back up. I don't know when this was in the timeline, but you spent some time in Southeast Asia also, right?
Yeah, I spent a good deal of time. That impinges a bit on why I started writing. I was actually traveling back and forth between Bangkok, Thailand, and working there, and then working in the U.S. And that was a 17-hour flight, which I was taking as many times as 3 times a month.
Wow!
And so I decided I would start writing books. And so I during the course of those 17-hour flights, and so that's when I started writing books. Amazing.
Now, did you just have a desire to put pen to paper, or were you looking at it as maybe an opportunity to create an additional source of income?
The answer is yes. I was interested in the additional source of income, and I had a close personal friend who was also a relative, married to one of my mother's sisters. Dugan Larson is his name, a full Ojibwe Indian. And he kept talking about we ought to do a book on ancient Indian game gathering methods.
Amazing.
And so, so I wrote the book, and then because survival was very, very important at that time, we changed the book to a survival cast to it. And the important thing to remember about Indians is that they couldn't, I'm talking about American Indians, and my Dugan did refer to himself as being an Indian continually. A very hardworking, a good guy. And but he continually pointed out that Indians couldn't expend more energy getting game than they garnered from the game itself when they ate it or used the skin or whatever. So the methods that they used to gather game had little to do with hunting and fishing and fair pursuit and that sort of thing.
Amazing. For those unfamiliar with Ragnar Benson, he's written over 47 books to date, right? And
46, yeah.
Many books here. Basically, I'm just going through some of the bibliography. Do-it-yourself medicine, basically the modern survival retreat. How to live off the land. Survival techniques here. This was at a time back in the 70s and 80s, especially when survival was very big.
It's big. Yeah, it's coming back again, people are realizing. Now, I should mention the most recent book that I wrote, again, as a result of folks asking about it, and that is a book titled How to Survive the Coming Plagues. And it's offered from Venture Publications. It's not a Paladin book, but it is available from Amazon. How to Survive the Coming Plagues. And I was often asked in terms of the plagues and diseases and so forth that I ran into in the third world, how did you avoid getting them, so forth, and how do we avoid having the germs and microbes taken over our lives? So if you're interested in that subject, that book is available from Amazon.
I'm very intrigued with the titles. It's about survival, and it's very specialized knowledge that you had, and you started putting it to print. When you first started off, did you have a hard time finding a publisher? Did you start self-publishing? What did you do?
I contacted Paladin Press, and they were immediately interested. And awesome. So that was, I think, 79, that we got our first book out. And then they had an idea for a couple of more books, one of them with more of an emphasis on survival within the city, which it intrigues a lot of people, because that's not going to be easy. Survival out in the rural areas, especially rural agricultural areas, is not that tough.
Here we go, Ragnar's Urban Survival, A Hard Times Guide to Staying Alive in the City. I like that title. Most of us are living in the city, and we're going to be back to, I want to go back to some of the places you visited, but let me ask you a question. Here we are in 2010. We've got a apparent missile launch off the coast of California a few weeks ago. We've got North Korea. It looks like ready to, launch a nuke against South Korea. I mean, all this crap going on around the world. We're in some hard times. Where are we in the timeline of history? What's the future for us here in America, Ragnar, as you see it?
Well, as I see it, having studied Berlin, London, Madrid, Rome, a lot of those cities, Nanking would be another one, Hong Kong, Singapore, and so forth, the humans are tremendously adaptable, and they're going to try very, very hard to maintain their status quo and maintain their normal kind of life. Now, it may ratchet on down a bit, but I don't think that it's going to be a total collapse. Even in situations like Berlin and Dresden and so forth, which were horribly, horribly destroyed during World War II, there was a total collapse and so forth. But humans are adaptable. And so, Bruce, this may not be what you want to hear, but my experience suggests that they're going to continue to work in their own private sort of way to maintain the status quo, and things are going to subside rather than collapse, unless we have some open warfare, or if the North Koreans decide to use a bomb or something.